Watching the sunrise over the narrow streets of Ridgewood Heights, the suburb seemed to sleep under a veil of serenity. Beautiful homes with manicured lawns and stately oak trees whispering stories of days gone by created the illusion of normality. But there was a subtle tension in the air, as if a storm were lurking beneath the calm. Ridgewood High School sat on a hill, its brick walls and weathered windows holding the secrets of 1,000 teenage lives, their voices echoing in the hallways and athletic fields. It was here, in this heart of suburban life, that Kyle Elliott arrived, a new student whose gaze was quiet and focused, as if he carried many untold stories within him. Kyle slid through the shadowy alleys of the schoolyard, avoiding unnecessary attention. His clothes were simple, unadorned, and his gait was calm and calculated. He knew that Ridgewood Heights was a dangerous place to stand out. A voice inside him insistently told him to stay out of the way. There were more than just new classes and new faces. There were intense power plays, hidden resentments, and invisible lines dividing students by status and dominance. Kyle remembered his grandfather's lessons. A fight ends when a threat can be neutralized without causing harm. His training in applied acrobatics and self-defense was not for fighting, but for assessing the situation and skillfully moving forward. But here, his skills were best kept secret. The hallways of the school came alive with each new bell, student voices mingling in the stream of trailers and discussions. Kyle immediately caught everyone's attention. When he paused to think, a challenging look was already slid his way, someone with a tense smirk. Dax Mitchell, captain of the football team, glided through the halls with the confidence of his status, walking as if the school's world revolved around him. His muscles bulged beneath his thick school uniform. His jaw was set, and his eyes were narrowed in a cold, decisive stare, as if he were searching for a new target to control. Brock Stevens and Chase Griffin, his bodyguards and enforcers of evil errands, followed him like shadows, one silent and gruff, the other cunning and sharp as a knife. The first was a small encounter in a narrow hallway when Dax, crossing the street, accidentally bumped Kyle with his shoulder. Kyle resisted the temptation to respond with a sharp word. Instead, his body moved to the side with small grace, not giving his opponent room for another attack. Maggie Reed, watching from afar from the bench, saw a small spark in Kyle's eyes. Not fear, but something else. Hidden and almost invisible. Allison Floyd, sitting by the window, wrote it all down in her journal, as if recording the beginning of a new chapter for the school community. Tayson Collins, a senior and former athlete, moved through the crowd, looking quietly interested in what was happening. The tension had been building for days. The little sarcastic comments in the cafeteria, the intrusive presence of Brock and Chase at the most inopportune moments, all like a well-coordinated orchestra of persecution. Kyle, on the other hand, tried not to give in and avoid conflict, as if dancing on a tightrope. His movements were measured, each action brought about the preservation of peace around him. But the muscles were tense, and the gaze suspiciously wary when for the first time, Mr. Harper, a history teacher and former gymnastics coach, noticed the invisible connection between the student's grace and his inner tension. During one of their lessons, when books and formulas alternated with animated discussions, Harper's gaze lingered on Kyle, sensing in him that rare potential that could not be hidden. It was evening, and tensions were running high in the gym after school. Kyle, waiting in silence for practice to end, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight when Dax shoved him, warning him of the boundaries of his territory. The sudden impulse turned into a slick dance of movement, with Kyle using acrobatic skills to not only evade but also channel the momentum of his opponents into each other. Brock and Chase, their tasks forgotten, collided in the echoing gym, causing shock and laughter from several bystanders. The effect was powerful and unexpected, a display of strength without aggression, agility without threat. Only Mr. Harper, watching from afar, revealed respect in his eyes, recognizing in this moment the beginning of change. Word of Kyle's unusual abilities spread through the school like a gentle wind that can change direction. Dax, feeling that he was losing his grip on the area and attention, began planning a showcase, gathering a crowd of students on the field after school. The goal was clear: restore order through fear, make Kyle bow his head. Meanwhile, Maggie and Allison discussed the expected event, trying to figure out which way the ship of this story would turn. Tyson, suddenly joining Kyle's side, became a source of football insights that could be useful in the upcoming clashes. As the evening wore on, The sun slowly sank behind a tree on the horizon. The old, abandoned sports stadium became the arena for the main confrontation. The shouts and rustling of the gathering crowd grew louder, but in the center stood only Kyle, calm, detached, his eyes full of understanding and determination. He knew that there was no place for roughness here. His weapons were precision and control. A moment of composure and suddenly a flow of movement. The air was filled with speed, agility, and tactical depth. And tactical. Dax and his gang, losing their footing, were increasingly succumbing to Kyle's power, which was like an invisible web holding them back, depriving them of any hope of victory. Their awkward poses and confused looks evoked a mixture of surprise and respect from the audience, and a new balance was felt in the air. When the tension had eased and only the rustling evening wind remained, Kyle approached Mr. Harper. His voice was quiet but confident as he spoke of how his grandfather had taught him to avoid fights before they began, leaving his opponents unharmed but defeated without fear or pain. The conversation had been a bridge between the past and the present, showing that true strength was not brute force but wisdom and self-control. The next day at Ridgewood High School, the atmosphere was noticeably different. The fear of Dax seemed to have diminished, and Kyle had gained the unspoken respect of his peers. Even Dax, who had never known the word concession before, was forced to meet Kyle's eyes in silent recognition of the new reality. In this quiet victory, there was hope for change, for the beginning of something greater, something that went beyond the walls of the school and the squabbles. And while old conflicts rolled in and faded, the school lived on, filled with mixed emotions, new expectations, and questions that needed to be answered. How far is a person willing to go to protect his ideals? And will it be possible to maintain peace when it seems that the fight has already begun? Let this be the beginning of a long journey on which Kyle and his new friends will discover and change many things. As Kyle continued on his way, he couldn't help but notice that new challenges lurked around every corner of Ridgewood Heights, and that friends and foes could change as they followed the invisible threads of fate. This story was only gaining momentum, promising waves of emotion and unexpected twists ahead. Pulse of conflict. The hallways of Ridgewood High School were quiet in the morning, but as recess approached, everything came alive with an undercurrent of tension. Kyle Elliott moved along the walls, his eyes calm and wary as he scanned the space around him. New to the school, he kept to the shadows as if by habit, as if the footsteps and conversations around him were part of a world he was trying not to draw attention to. He had a history he didn't want to talk about, skills that were judged by the merits of his grandfather, a former soldier. His movements were precise, almost soundless, and his gaze was cold and imperturbable. On that first day, he had already felt how a mass of eyes, each reaching out to him with varying degrees of curiosity and condemnation, were boring into his shoulders, alienating him and forcing him to be on guard. Dax Mitchell, captain of the Rams football team, slid down the hallway like a shadow, but a cheerful voice behind him gave away his presence. High shoulders, clutching a backpack, strong eyes with a predatory tint. In his company were Brock, massive and straightforward, and Chase, whose eyes gleamed with a mischievous glint that made even seasoned players wonder about his plans. Each time they approached, the air was filled with tension, like a harbinger of a storm. Dax wasn't just walking, he was conquering the space, asserting his status. And Kyle, who noticed their gaze, instinctively narrowed his eyes, trying to remain calm, like a cold stream of air passing through the heat. The first encounter was subtle to most, but vivid to those who paid attention. In the dining room, as the sunlight slid across the tables, there was a touch, barely perceptible, towards Kyle. A push from Brock. A quiet punch to the shoulder, tangled with Chase's sarcastic words. Kyle held his breath, wordlessly, turning his head to meet Dax's expression, heavy with confident menace. His face betrayed no fear or anger, only a real coldness, like an ice sculpture. Instead of answering, he chose movement, a sidestep, a gliding motion across the floor, graceful and precise. His body spoke for him, showing that he was not just an inconspicuous newcomer, but someone who could control the situation without making too much noise. The bystanders in the audience exchanged quiet glances. Maggie Reed, a young observer with a keen eye, noticed the fleeting maneuvers and futile attempts to instill fear. Her eyes were sympathetic, as if she knew there was more behind the calm figure. Tazen Collins, a former athlete, couldn't help but notice Kyle's movements. Slick, precise, fluid. He held his gaze and felt a strange respect in his soul. His own years of training and fighting his own demons came flooding back. Allison Floyd, known for her independence, watched with restraint, mentally recording what was happening, like a journalist preparing a report on a real school drama. The tension was building like the creaking of a wooden floor in an empty room, barely noticeable, but growing with each step. Several times Dax tried to provoke Kyle, throwing insulting remarks at his feet, the minions prepared to support him in any way they could. But all attempts were met with calm and slow dodging, twisting the body, using the space to avoid being trapped. Instead of brute force, Kyle used tactics reminiscent of a game of chess, where every move was calculated in advance, and the goal was not to win by striking, but to avoid defeat and maintain self-respect. The observers began to notice that behind the glint of brute strength, Dax was insecure, clenching his jaw time and time again as his attempts to break Kyle failed. At times, it seemed as if a crack of pride was forming on his face, and his eyes, narrowing into thin slits, hid the fear of being nothing more than a shadow of his past achievements and the expectations that weighed unbearably on his shoulders. Glances of doubt and admiration flitted through the crowd, but no one dared to intervene yet. The first real breakthrough came in the gym. During a break, Dax, determined to prove his strength, had gathered a group of students around him, ready to witness his dominance. The seconds dragged on, when suddenly, Kyle, concentrating, moved in such a way that the air around him seemed to sway and bend. His body, like a wave, touched Brock and Chase in one smooth contact, causing no pain, but causing them to collide with each other. The loud noise and their awkward remarks echoed in the room, where surprise and laughter spread among those present. Eyes turned to Kyle. He was no longer just a quiet newcomer, but a player who could hold the game without aggression. At this point, Mr. Harper watched from afar, silently nodding his approval. He knew there was more to this display. Not just martial prowess, but a philosophy of discipline and control that was reflected in Kyle's every move. This experienced teacher and mentor saw in him the potential to change the atmosphere, to create a new type of force that could change schools and minds. He noticed how the young eyes of those being watched began to look for an example, how a new chapter in their lives could begin, and how to live without using harsh words. Word of Kyle's strange agility quickly spread throughout the school, stirring up attention and questions. Even Allison, known for her critical nature, admitted that there was something mysterious and alluring about Kyle. However, the tension only grew, and at times it seemed as if every shadow in the hallways remembered the upcoming fight that could not be avoided. Dax became increasingly desperate to maintain his status, and Brock and Chase became less and less confident in their roles as guardians of order and authority. In the late afternoon hours, when the sounds of footsteps in the hallways faded and the school community braced itself for new challenges, Kyle would lock eyes with Maggie. Their silent conversations and glances suggested that there was a time for decisive action ahead. But for now, there was still time to learn, to observe, to prepare. He would learn that the struggle for a place in the sun in Ridgewood Heights was just beginning, and that his own story would be filled with as much discovery as obstacles. As Kyle strode toward the classroom, he felt a sense of confidence building within him, not to force his way forward, but to win with intelligence, discipline, and grace. Behind him, he could hear the voices of friends and foes, but he knew this would be a difficult path. Suddenly the bell rang, creating a new wave of movement, unleashing a whirlwind of events that would lead smoothly into the next moment of fateful clashes and unexpected alliances. Sparks under the mask. In the school hallway, the sound of bells mingled with the endless stream of voices, creating the familiar Ridgewood Heights backdrop. Kyle Elliott walked with a measured step, his eyes sharp and precise as he followed every movement around him. His figure was like stone, still and yet filled with hidden power. It was as if he was trapped in his shell, neutral and quiet, not wanting to attract attention. Every gesture he made was carefully considered, as if he were playing a role he had not yet decided to fully reveal. In the classroom, history was being written in a new way. Mr. Harper had watched Kyle carefully during those first few days, noting the unusual grace with which he moved. He had seen the teenager avoid sudden movements, balancing the desire to remain invisible with the tension within him. Sitting on the edge of the table, the teacher had quietly said, "You hide a lot, Kyle, but playing in the shadows won't work with you." The words seemed to open a closed door, inviting a dialogue that would soon begin. Maggie Reed sat next to Allison Floyd by the window, their quick glances interspersed with quiet whispers. Both eyes followed the dynamics growing within the school community. Maggie, with her sharp mind and burning sense of justice, noticed how Kyle's inner world showed in his movements, mirroring the intensity of hidden emotions. Allison kept her distance, the voice of the many indecisive storms of the school community, carefully recording each change. In the gym, practice began, the sounds of balls being thrown permeating the school walls. Brock Stevens and Chase Griffin, who were accompanying Dax Mitchell, noticed how Kyle was confidently demonstrating agility and strength, but not engaging in ordinary combat. His movements were not simply acrobatic. Every spring, every turn balanced the line between art and self-defense. Brock tried to get closer, but Kyle's agility became an obstacle, and Chase watched with a grin, but without malice. Dax, who reigned as a king on the football field, felt his power begin to waver. He couldn't allow the new kid to challenge his status. His eyes were hot with anger, his lips were tight, and his fists were clenched in nervous tension. He was planning on making a grand entrance after school to make his case once again and put an end to it. But a new observer, Tayson Collins, a former high school sports star, noticed something different about Kyle, and it gave him pause. Mr. Harper watched the situation with a subtle smile and the wisdom he had acquired over the years. He saw this as not just a student, but a person with a story that had not yet been told. He offered support, becoming a mentor who helped Kyle think through the situation and find a non-violent way out. Their conversations outside the school walls became a calm in the turbulent sea of teenage life, where each understood that the real struggle was happening within. Maggie, though cautiously, was increasingly inspired by Kyle's determination to overcome prejudice and pressure. Her eyes reflected the desire to help, the courage to challenge the school's rules together. Allison, watching from the outside, realized that there was a voice of new hope hidden in this story. A voice that could change the rules of the game, change the very nature of conflict in Ridgewood Heights. Suddenly, a thin shadow appeared in the hallway. Dax and his minions were approaching, and the tension rose. Kyle, without panicking, stood in a pose that resembled a dancer preparing for a performance. His gaze remained calm and cool, as if an internal compass pointed in the right direction. Chase and Brock tried to provoke a reaction, but to no avail. Kyle did not rise to the provocation. At that moment, Tyson appeared around the corner, bringing with him the experience and authority on which the dynamics of the relationship depended. His intervention was timely, preventing the escalation from spiraling out of control. He passed by with a slight grin, simultaneously sending Dax a silent challenge, forcing him to look at himself from a different angle. This intervention was the first crack in the unshakable armor of tyranny. During recess, the conversations became more animated. Individual students began to gather around Kyle, reading between the lines, adding their own observations. Maggie noticed the smallest details in the dialogue and gestures. Allison registered the growing interest, wondering how this story could become a symbol of change, and how each voice could be the key to understanding. Kyle's agility elicited whispers and questions, awakening more than curiosity in the kids. It was an invitation to change, a challenge to the patterns of school life, where power often belonged to the most aggressive. Mr. Harper understood that his role went beyond that of a teacher. He was an ally in a new era, one that began with quiet courage and precise movements. With each passing minute, the tension around Kyle grew. He increasingly realized that he could not hide, and that his unique skills were not just a means of self-defense, but also a tool for creating his own world of safety and justice. His internal struggle, previously hidden, was now becoming the property of many looks, and not only hostile ones. Brock and Chase, in the crowd of students, exchanged glances, puzzled by the way resistance manifested itself through silent grace. Their usual methods suddenly seemed ineffective, and they began to wonder how to restructure their strategies and perhaps their roles in their peer community. These thoughts reflected not only the school hierarchy, but also a deeper, internalized anxiety. Maggie and Allison, watching from different angles, began to form a picture. They were discussing not just conflict, but how to build respect and change the atmosphere without being too aggressive. Their interactions and active discussions became whispers of hope, echoes of changes that were not yet heard but already felt. Mr. Harper invited Kyle to train in a secluded place after class, a chance to open up and hone his skills without prying eyes. It was the beginning of a new phase, where the mentor and student combined not only the strength of the body, but also the strength of the spirit. Their conversations were as precise as their movements, filled with deep meaning and a desire for peace. This period became a fulcrum for Kyle, where his ability to take the blows of fate without anger and at the same time maintain internal strength became the most important resource. He increasingly understood that the fight for oneself does not require violence, but requires self-control, skills, and sensitivity to the surrounding world. These thoughts permeated every new step. The atmosphere at the school was slowly changing. Word of Kyle's strange agility was spreading, causing mixed feelings, from admiration to skepticism and curiosity. It was not just a peculiarity, but a symbol of the possibility of change, the beginning of a new chapter where peace and justice could coexist with strength and confidence. Dax watched this, seething with a sense of loss of control. His usual methods were ineffective against Kyle's calm and precision. The football captain's gaze became increasingly filled with uncertainty, reflecting the pressures of his parents and societal expectations. This internal conflict was slowly beginning to erode the foundations of his former authority. On the last day of school, before Dax's promised showcase, tension hung in the air like a thick cloud. The schoolyard and hallways seemed like the stage for a momentous event, a climax that would change everything. Students gathered, some eager for the spectacle, others with a hidden anxiety, knowing that the balance of power might shift ahead. Kyle stood to the side, forced into the spotlight, showing no emotion, just a set jaw and calm eyes that read the situation without fear. His plan was not based on force, but on precision and proportion, demonstrating the highest level of control and discipline. These were the qualities that would be the answer to Dax's challenge. Tyson Collins watched nearby, ready to step in if things got out of hand, but he knew Kyle could handle it himself. His role had shifted from coach to quiet supporter, an agent of change. Maggie and Allison, hiding in the crowd, exchanged glances, each waiting for something to unfold that couldn't be stopped. Ridgewood Heights, silent inside, was preparing for an event that could mark the beginning of a new era. The school walls seemed to remember every move and every word, reflecting the spirit of teenage struggle and exploration. And now, when everything was ready, every breath and movement of Kyle promised not just a battle, but a lesson that did not require brutality. A lesson in strength through intelligence and discipline. Suddenly, the space around them seemed to freeze, and on the last imperfect movement, a story began that could change everything and tell how inner peace can defeat the chaos around. In response to the challenge, a new stage of fate began, where the veil of prejudice began to dissipate, giving way to something pure and strong. And as the silence before the storm came, thoughts of what true strength meant quietly entered the hearts of those who watched. In that silence, hope was born, and the question that remained unanswered spoke louder than words. As this moment ended, the next chapter was ready, where all the secrets would be revealed, and the hero would find his place. Now tell me, have you ever encountered a situation where you had to defend yourself not by force, but by intelligence and cunning? Share your stories in the comments. Dance in sport. The Ridgewood High Gym was filled with a buzz of voices and the screeching of basketball shoes on the hardwood floor. Kyle Elliott stood against the wall, watching the movements of Brock and Chase, who were squirming in the corner as usual, exchanging menacing glances, preparing to put him under pressure again. He was a slick, quiet man who seemed to melt into the atmosphere, slipping quietly between the pair of bullies, giving them no reason for direct confrontation. Without a word, his body responded to every little push with amazing precision. Suddenly, with a fluidity and grace that belied the rough surroundings, Kyle executed a series of light jumps and spins. Instead of engaging in a fight, he turned his enemy's energy against them. Brock and Chase, unable to keep their balance, collided head-on, releasing a thud that caught the eyes of the entire crowd. The room froze for a moment. Instead of the expected rage, Brock and Chase looked confused and awkward, because no one expected such agility from the newcomer, who had seemed too quiet and inconspicuous until then. Maggie Reed, standing in the stands, narrowed her eyes with interest. Her sharp gaze caught more than just a physical clash. Kyle showed no aggression, only precision and control, making one wonder about his true capabilities. Word of the episode quickly spread through the halls of the school, causing mixed feelings. Some of the kids who had previously been afraid to make eye contact with Dax Mitchell and his entourage now began to whisper with a hint of admiration and hope. Even Dax, who was present nearby, could not hide his irritation at the last moment. His jaw clenched and his fingers tightened on the handle of his backpack, as if trying to maintain control of the situation. Meanwhile, the unknown observer was Tayson Collins, a senior and former athlete whose experience and status at the school made his opinion matter. He glanced at Kyle and nodded, as if appreciating the new kid's hidden strength and tenacity. It was a sign of support that meant more than words. For Tayson, accustomed to the fierce competition of the gym, Kyle's grace and poise were fresh and inspiring. Tyson approached Maggie and Allison Floyd, a student known for her analytical mind and independence. Allison quietly noted how the changes in everyone's behavior were causing a wave of discussion and hope for a new atmosphere at the school. Their conversation emphasized that true strength was not in brutal domination, but in the ability to control oneself and the situation, even when the enemy was trying to impose fear. At that moment, the sound of Mr. Harper's boots, Kyle's history teacher and mentor, was heard in the gym. His eyes, filled with understanding and wisdom, looked into his student's face. He exclaimed loudly, "Kyle, you have something that many here lack, the ability to overcome without unnecessary harm." His voice sounded like a quiet exhortation for the student to move on and not lose faith in his principles. Laughter erupted from the noisy room as Brock and Chase tried to justify themselves, smirking to hide their shame. But the tension in the air did not subside, becoming a living reminder that Kyle had his own territory, though not one marked by brute force, but by the art of mastering the body and mind. That night in the gym marked the beginning of a new phase of struggle. Not words and threats, but silent movements and calculations made Kyle an unexpected player in the school hierarchy. His rise through inner conviction remained a mystery to many, but a noticeable change to those who closely followed the dynamics of the relationship. Maggie watched as other classmates, previously indifferent or intimidated, began to find new ways to express their power, the will to change and respect without violence. And Allison, always willing to look at things from a new perspective, began to wonder about the role of such an unconventional hero in the future of Ridgewood Heights. At the same time, Dax clenched his fists, realizing that his usual methods were not working, and that new challenges lay ahead. His arrogance was met with fear of losing control, but also with the opportunity for internal growth. The players on the field were changing, and now it was up to them to decide how the game would play out. As the bell rang to end practice, Kyle quietly left the gym, sensing that this evening would mark a turning point not only for him, but for the entire school. His movements left a trail of confidence that unexpectedly inspired Tayson to take a step toward a new alliance. The atmosphere in Ridgewood Heights was filled with unspoken hopes and worries as the events and encounters continued. A game where every move could change fates loomed on the horizon, and Kyle finally felt that his time had come. His journey had only just begun, and trials lay ahead that would require not only physical mastery, but also fortitude. As he walked through the narrow corridors, Kyle thought about the importance of controlling not only his body, but his emotions as well. The world around him was changing, and he had to make a choice: stay in the shadows or step into the light, proving that true power lies in composure and self-discipline. The next chapter of his story was already calling him forward, promising new encounters and discoveries that he could not miss. Whispers behind the scenes. The rumors were everywhere, like a subtle scent, elusive but inescapable. In the hallways of Ridgewood High, stories of Kyle Elliott's strange agility were retold with a mixture of wonder and skepticism. His sudden emergence into the school hierarchy was disrupting the familiar cycle of power for Dax Mitchell, whose name had once been a death sentence. Now, though, even his closest companions, Brock and Chase, were beginning to question the steadfastness of their Ridgewood Rams football captain. Maggie Reed watched as rumors turned to action and dialogues filled with hidden tension. She saw the eyes of her classmates for the first time not in envy or fear, but with genuine interest, slide over Kyle. He moved with his usual calm, as if unaware of the wave that rolled behind him. His movements were smooth and precise, and his unspoken thoughts were hidden behind a calm mask, emphasizing an inner strength that did not require words. That evening, in the vacant lot behind the football field, Dax clenched his fists, watching the sunset reflected in disappointed eyes. Hidden behind Brock's broad back and Chase's predatory gaze, he tried to pick up the scattered fragments of his control over the school. His pride would not allow him to admit that Kyle's arrival was destroying the usual rules. The pressure from his parents and the team was like an invisible thread tightening around his chest. Mr. Harper stood by the window of the history room, thoughtfully studying the books, but his thoughts were hovering around Kyle. He saw hidden grace behind the student's outward reserve and recognized the familiar coaching notes. The conversation with Maggie and the occasional stories of the older student Tayson Collins filled the teacher with confidence that this quiet boy with unique abilities could turn the balance of power upside down. Harper understood that the word on the court would belong to those who, with their actions, proved the meaning of power. In the cafeteria, Allison Floyd listened quietly to the gossip. Her penchant for objectivity prevented her from being distracted by the heated gossip. Kyle isn't just a new textbook for isolation, Allison thought. Her eyes met Maggie's, maintaining a silent alliance between those who were witnessing the change. Allison wrote in her journal that the school was on the cusp of change, where the usual stereotypes about courage and strength would be visibly challenged. The tension had been building as Dax announced his plan to intimidate after school, gathering his allies and inviting his classmates to witness. A showcase, he called the challenge, intent on regaining respect through overt dominance. But inside, he was wary. Being watched over by Kyle and the threat of losing his status made him nervous. Dax's eyes narrowed into a cold line as he overheard a casual conversation between Kyle and Mr. Harper that veered toward the finer points of self-defense. Meanwhile, Kyle continued to practice alone, going through movement after movement, perfecting the balance between speed and precision. His thoughts returned to the lessons of his grandfather, who had instilled in him the most important truth. End the conflict before it begins. Each jump, each turn, was not just physical acrobatics, but an expression of inner discipline. None of the school children saw him at these moments. Even Maggie, who happened to be passing by, only noticed the restrained determination in his eyes. The day of the showcase arrived with changeable weather, reflecting the mood of all participants. The atmosphere between the football field and the abandoned sports ground was filled with people eager to see the spectacle, waiting for the old rules to clash with the new order. Dax walked with his head held high, but his clenched fists showed a readiness to fight not only Kyle, but his own fears. His gang felt the change too, Brock's gaze darting between confidence and sudden vulnerability, and Chase doing everything he could to maintain the illusion of control. When the clash began, Kyle's movement seemed almost like a dance, with each gesture controlling space and time. Rather than attacking indiscriminately, he used the momentum of his opponents, driving them against each other with impeccable precision. Brock and Chase, colliding and off balance, suddenly found themselves in a position where their muscles could not help, and confusion contorted their faces. Kyle remained unharmed, but made it clear that the power of aggression was finally at risk. After the competitive hour, silence filled the space, through which only the heavy breathing of the participants penetrated. The students who witnessed it felt for the first time that strength could be expressed not in fists, but in control and minimalism. Maggie watched the changes in the eyes of her classmates, and Allison was already preparing the voice of public opinion for new interpretations of the events. Even Tyson, a former athlete, was amazed to see how technical finesse eclipsed brute force. In a subsequent conversation with Mr. Harper, Kyle revealed the depth of his past. His stories about his grandfather, several lessons learned, and the importance of avoiding conflict touched the teacher's soul, reminding him that strength is, above all, responsibility and choice. Mr. Harper saw that when a teenager spoke quietly and simply, there was a whole world of experience and inner philosophy hidden behind the words. This moment became a turning point not only for Kyle, but also for his mentor. Meanwhile, Dax, on the brink of defeat, felt the weight of his actions, experiencing for the first time the piercing sensation of loss of control. Reflected in the mirror, he caught his own gaze, not just that of a capricious leader, but of a young man who had lost respect and now needed to be reinvented. His mental struggle lasted only seconds, but it was palpable, like a magnetic field of tension between old habits and the need for change. Returning to the routine of school, the atmosphere changed invisibly but perceptibly. The fear of Dax slowly receded, giving way to mutual respect and new norms. Kyle walked the halls with an easy confidence, not needing big words or displays of strength. The look Dax met as he ran down the hall was accompanied by a silent nod, a gesture of recognition, and the possibility of a new beginning. Everyone involved in these changes knew that there would be many challenges ahead, but now the school breathed differently, with hope and the knowledge that true power lies not in pressure and aggression, but in control and the ability to listen and understand. The wind in Ridgewood Heights whispered change, and the evenings were filled not only with noise but also with meaningful pauses. Now, a question for you, friends. Have you ever encountered a situation where you had to defend your position using not force, but intelligence and cunning? Share your stories in the comments, and let's figure out together what a real victory means. This chapter is coming to an end, but the story is just beginning. New trials await us ahead, the next step, and new challenges are already being prepared. The city is silent before the battle. In the late afternoon light of Ridgewood Heights, the streets seemed still, as if the city had waited for a storm to come. Kyle Elliott sat by the window in his room, breathing slowly, feeling the tension tighten in his chest. His eyes, usually impassive, were now filled with a slight excitement, the subtle tremor of an impending fight. As if in a dream, fragments of recent days at Ridgewood High flashed before his mind, repeated jostling in the hallways, snide remarks in the cafeteria, and finally, that unexpected encounter in the gym where Kyle's agility had threaded a new path between the opponents. He remembered Mr. Harper, the history teacher with the air of a wise mentor, talking about human strength that came not from brute force, but from control and discipline. Now, on the eve of the decisive confrontation, the teacher's words rang especially clear. Mr. Harper sat across from Kyle in the cozy office, holding a cup of iced tea in his hands, his calm eyes sparkling with understanding and support. He spoke quietly, but each word penetrated deeply. You are not just a fighter, Kyle. You are someone who can end a conflict before it begins. Remember, your movements are the language you speak without words. In this city, many are accustomed to shouting and loudly declaring themselves with weapons and threats. Your strength lies in control, in the ability to remain master of the situation. Kyle nodded, feeling the words sink into his mind more slowly and deeply than any lesson. His gaze slid to the window where the last of the daylight hummed. His fingers instinctively went to his backpack, where his training gloves were neatly folded, a reminder of the grandfather who had trained with him and taught him to unleash precision rather than aggression. The calm in Kyle's body grew, but so did the understanding that this evening would change a lot. Meanwhile, across town, at the Ridgewood High football field, Dax Mitchell leaned heavily on the railing, surrounded by his trusted friends, Brock Stevens and Chase Griffin. His eyes, cold and narrowed, burned into the space, as if every second of anticipation was a push to action. Brock, muscles tense and awkwardly confident, growled something at Chase, causing him to smile faintly. But Dax's attention was directed to something much more serious. The glass of the abandoned training hall, in the reflection of which the figure of Kyle appeared, quietly gliding into the night. Dax took a deep breath, his fists clenching as if they were gathering a storm. A voice inside him told him that his control of the situation was slipping away, not because Kyle was physically stronger, but because his intelligence and agility were creating an invisible shield. It was a challenge for Dax to maintain his advantage and show who was really boss within these walls. He gritted his teeth, fighting back his growing irritation. Brock and Chase, sensing the tension in the air, exchanged glances and shook their heads in disapproval, but remained silent. Meanwhile, Maggie Reed, who had been watching from afar, cautiously approached the football field. Her eyes, full of compassion and curiosity, studied Kyle's figure and the tension that was generated by the talk of him in the school hallways. She knew that behind that outward reserve there was something more than just fear or detachment. There was a glimmer of determination in her eyes, to be more than just a spectator, but someone who would support those who desperately needed protection. Voices came from the street. Tyson Collins, a senior and former athlete, was emerging with a few other kids, all impressive and confident. His presence added to the sense of inevitability of what was to come. Tyson was not Kyle's friend, but he saw something unusual in him that commanded respect. He walked confidently, looking at Dax, but without recognition in his eyes, more with a neutral readiness to intervene if necessary. The tension was thickening. There was a sense of preparation in the air that everything was about to change. Allison Floyd, one of the school's most observant students, stood to the side, recording the proceedings on her phone. Her comments, light and ironic, were the voice of the entire school community. "This is going to be a show," she said quietly, sensing that no one would be able to remain indifferent today. Late in the evening, as the shadows lengthened and the sky darkened to a deep blue, Kyle walked slowly out of the brightly lit school. His movements were measured, each step a small victory over his fear. There was an acceptance of the inevitable in his eyes. That was when Mr. Harper approached him, his eyes sparkling with approval and quiet confidence. "Remember, Kyle," he said quietly, "sometimes the loudest battle is the silence you keep inside." Behind Dax, Brock and Chase were clearly excited. They were discussing the plan loudly, waving their arms, promising to show everyone who's the real king. But Dax's muscles remained tense, his mouth was set, and his eyes were sharp as knives. He saw before him not just a new student, but a challenge that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, Maggie took a few cautious steps closer to Kyle, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "You're not alone. We're all here." Kyle nodded briefly, accepting the support but not losing his focus. This wasn't just a fight. This was the moment when the rules of the game itself began to change. Energy was running high, ambitions were clashing, and shadows were multiplying around the football field. Each participant felt the fluid line between fear and determination. There was a sense in the air that what lay ahead was more than just a confrontation. It was a lesson in life, in self-control, and a test that would be a turning point for everyone at Ridgewood High. As the last of the city's light faded, Kyle clenched his fists, not to attack, but to maintain his balance within. His gaze was fixed ahead, where the real battle awaited him, and he was ready to show that strength was not just physical might, but the art of mastering oneself in the situation at the same time. At that moment, when the silence before the storm seemed loudest, for a second everyone looked at each other, as if reading their own thoughts without words. And someone quietly whispered, "This isn't just a power struggle at school. This is a battle for respect and understanding." As everyone plunged into the night ahead, they knew that tomorrow would never be the same. They just had to hold their breath and watch the final chords of Kyle Elliott and Dax Mitchell's story unfold. Balance between power and mind. In the evening light, as the last rays of sunlight colored the abandoned sports field next to the Ridgewood High School football field, there was a tense silence. Kyle Elliott stood in the shadows of the trees, his eyes cold with concentration, his breathing even and calm. The air seemed to tighten with anticipation. Across the street from him, Dax Mitchell strode out of the shadows with Brock and Chase, their faces a mixture of malice and demonstrative aggression. The slight twitch of Dax's lips betrayed his inner tension. His fingers clenched into fists, but Kyle could see that there was uncertainty hidden in the aggressor's rigidity. The first flash of action was a sudden lunge. Brock lunged forward, trying to grab Kyle, but at the same moment Kyle deftly jumped aside, landing softly on the ground like a cat. His body moved with the grace he had learned under his grandfather's watchful eye. Every movement precise, calculated, and deliberate. There was no outburst of rage or desperation, only coolness and control. Kyle was in complete control of himself and the situation at that moment, a contrast to Brock's shaky attack. Chase, hearing his ally's failure, tried to surround Kyle, looking for a chance to strike suddenly. He closed the space. His movements were cunning, like those of a nimble predator. But even in this plan there was a hint of haste, caused by nervousness. The radiance of the moonlight slid across the crooks of Chase's head and taut forehead. Kyle, slowing time in his mind, calculated the trajectory of each step and each breath. He did not attack first. His determination was in defense, in minimizing the damage inflicted. Dax lunged forward, trying to seize the initiative suddenly, choosing the moment when Kyle was surrounded. But recent lessons in acrobatics and self-defense had shaped his body into a machine ruled not by fear, but by discipline. He skidded across the ground, thrusting his hip out to deflect the attack, then spun, using his momentum against his attacker. The sound of claws hitting air seemed loud in the stillness of the night, and the faces of Seb were etched in surprise. The school hallways and gym seemed far away. And just a few hours ago, Kyle had been sitting in class with Mr. Harper, listening to his mentor's wise words about how true strength does not require violence. Now, on the edge, those words had become living principles. Behind him, the shadows of Maggie Reed and Allison Floyd flickered, watching warily from the sidelines, hidden among the trees. Their presence gave the moment a special meaning, as if the fate of the school depended on this fight. Kyle, sensing another attack coming, deftly leapt over Chase's elbows, locking their movements to pick out weak spots. His hands moved in sync over easily detectable joints, but his touches were precise and bloodless. Not a muscle moved without purpose. Every detail of his technique and exercise in chaos control. Dax began to lose confidence, the shaking in his knees becoming noticeable, and his previously pompous gaze was now confused. At that moment, Tayson Collins, a former athlete and senior, stepped out of the shadows with an energetic, crooked smile and his hands outstretched. "Enough of this nonsense," he said, in a voice that both conveyed authority and sought to lighten the mood. His sudden appearance changed the dynamic. The tension eased a bit, though even Tyson knew it was only a temporary pause before a final decision was made. Using this moment, Kyle made a swift lunge, not striking, but carefully and with extreme precision blocking the movements of Dax and his assistants. He did not simply dodge the aggression, but directed its flow to the side, like a skilled conductor choosing an instrument. The faces of his opponents reflected growing confusion, a feeling of loss of control, which was much more terrible than any blows. After a series of slow but mature maneuvers that could have been a textbook example of tactical self-defense, Dax dropped to one knee, confusion and dismay mingling on his face. The sudden silence seemed louder than any scream, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, as if to emphasize the end of the conflict. Around him, the crowd began to applaud, but most of all, the quiet sigh of relief from everyone who had been waiting for the conflict to end was audible. Mr. Harper approached Kyle with respect, his eyes radiating pride and understanding. "You have proven that force should be a tool of discipline, not destruction," he said, placing a gentle hand on his student's shoulder. Maggie Reed and Allison Floyd exchanged glances, their eyes revealing a new perception of events and characters that seemed so distant and yet so close. Dax looked up, silent, and met Kyle's gaze. In that silence was an unspoken surrender, and perhaps the beginning of a different path. His tough facade was cracking, revealing the internal conflict that had previously been hidden deep beneath the mask of a bully and a team captain. His presence was different now, and it was clear that this lesson had changed not only the dynamics of the relationship, but also his internal understanding of power. Kyle stepped unsteadily but confidently towards Mr. Harper and quietly told him about his past and his grandfather, who taught him to end fights before they started. His voice was measured but sincere. This advice was the key to living without unnecessary conflicts, preserving himself and the world around him. He did not want to be a hero who intervened with force, but wanted to set an example of wisdom and restraint. As the light slowly faded and the first stars began to appear, the students dispersed, discussing what had happened. The atmosphere in Ridgewood Heights seemed to lighten. The old hierarchy was crumbling, giving way to new ones. Kyle and Dax exchanged a silent nod, a symbol of the beginning of a new understanding and perhaps respect that had emerged where there had been hostility. This evening was not just an episode from the lives of teenagers, but a lesson in the balance between force and reason, a demonstration that true control and composure can change even the most severe conflicts. And now the question was not only heard within the walls of the school, but was addressed to every viewer. Have you ever encountered a situation when you had to defend yourself not by force, but by intelligence and cunning? This question remained open, inviting reflection and dialogue. And as the last glimmers of dusk left the Ridgewood Heights area, the future was painted before the heroes like a canvas with new challenges and opportunities, promising a continuation of events where the line between friendship and enemies could become thinner than ever before. New Dawn Ridgewood Heights. The school seemed different. The hallways of Ridgewood High no longer hummed with intense stares and veiled threats. Ever since the night Kyle Elliott had shown without a punch that strength wasn't always measured in muscle and noise, a new feeling had filled the air. Respect and cautious calm. Dax Mitchell walked slowly, as if he felt the weight of his crumbling authority resting heavily on his shoulders. His eyes, usually sharp and piercing, were now slightly shaky, and his jaw was loose at times, though his fists were still hidden in his pockets. The usual Brock and Chase were absent from his side, seemingly lost in their own thoughts after their unexpected defeat. An unusual silence thickened around, and only the rare glances of classmates full of doubt and surprise emphasized that changes were taking place not only in the atmosphere, but also in the very spirit of the children. Meanwhile, Kyle stood by the window of Mr. Harper's room, watching the students playing on the playground, where the rays of the sun shimmered in warm shades on a summer evening. There was a slight trace of fatigue on his face, while his hands rested calmly on the windowsill. Mr. Harper, sitting next to him, lit a lamp, whose soft rays added confidence to the intimate setting. His eyes sparkled with kindness and understanding. "You did what many failed to do. Not show brute force, but make others see its futility," the teacher began, carefully holding up an old photograph of a young soldier standing before a group of students, demonstrating fortitude and calm. "It reminds me of lessons your grandfather once taught me. He taught not to fight for the sake of fighting, but to end conflicts before they begin to destroy lives." Kyle looked at the photo, feeling the weight of the past he was trying to leave behind. "I was always afraid that my powers could hurt someone. My grandfather said that true power is in control. I just wanted to avoid conflict, hiding in the shadows." His voice was quiet, as if giving himself permission to admit it. "But now I understand that sometimes you have to stand up and show that it is not by force that you can rule, but by reason and precision." Mr. Harper smiled, nodding approvingly. At that moment, Maggie Reed walked into the room, her eyes full of respect and quiet joy. "Kyle, many people have noticed how things have changed since that night. You have inspired us. This is more than just beating Dax. This is a change that has begun to take root in the heart of the school," she said, supporting his shoulder. Suddenly, the voice of Allison Floyd, one of the active students who often surveyed the school's events and maintained the balance in the group, rang out in the hallway. "We are all tired of fear and oppression. Now we have hope that even in the most difficult circumstances you can find the strength to change." Her words slowly echoed through the walls, reminding everyone of a new era in Ridgewood Heights. Dax stood at the entrance to the gym, taking a deep breath, looking out at the empty stands and the remnants of his former glory. His internal conflict was as intense as his external struggle. He felt the first crack in his armor of insecurity begin to show. It was a moment that made him question who he wanted to become, a shadow of his own fear, or someone who could change for the sake of the future. Suddenly, Tayson Collins, a senior and former athlete who had long observed the events, remained on the side of reason and justice, approached him. His gaze was clear and honest. "Dax, no one said change was easy, but you can be an example to others if you stop hiding behind your fists in fear," he said quietly, extending his hand in friendship. The school community gradually filled with new stories, where everyone was looking for their place in the sun without fear and violence. Allison and Maggie organized meetings where students shared impressions and supported each other, and Mr. Harper continued to mentor Kyle, helping him integrate the wisdom of the past into the current challenges. Kyle took one last look at his comrades, and even at Dax, who nodded in silent acknowledgement. It was more than a concession. It was a quiet and profound gratitude for the lessons learned in the fires of battle. Each of them now stood on the threshold of a new understanding, one in which fortitude was valued as much as physical ability. A silence that seemed full of promise had fallen over Ridgewood Heights as the evening wore on. The wind rustled softly through the leaves of the trees, as if repeating the old saying, "Sometimes a moment of truth is all it takes to start a new dawn." The question that now hung in the air awaited answers from everyone. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to defend your position not by force, but by wit and cunning? Share your thoughts in the comments. With that call, the story of Kyle and his transformation in Ridgewood Heights moves smoothly into a new phase, no less complex and exciting. New challenges lie ahead, new chapters where friendship, respect, and inner growth will be key. Viewers remain on the threshold of this gripping drama, ready to see how youth and the power of the mind can change not only one person but an entire community.